Hi, it is noon on Wednesday, and so I'm Janet Fitch, so it must be Writing Wednesday, where I talk about writing, man, God, and the universe, and especially answer your writing questions. And So put them in the comments if you have questions that you've been wrestling with your writing. And if you ever want me to do a Writing Wednesday based on a question of yours, you can write it to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I can construct a Writing Wednesday around your question. So today's Writing Wednesday is going to be about point of view. I just taught a class in dialogue, and one of the questions people had for me was whether I would ever do an intensive on dialogue, on point of view, and that makes sense to do. To follow dialogue with character and point of view is usually the combination that we work with. So let's see if my Facebook is working, if my phone is working. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it. Hi, Lewis. Okay, now I know that we're working here. Oh, I'm glad that you enjoyed the dialogue course. Hi, Linda. Yeah, I've been working. I love doing these intensives for the community of writers to take a weekend, 5 2-hour sessions, and really get into the issues of some specific topic of writing. So dialogue is usually the thing that writers have trouble with, and agents and editors look at specifically dialogue scenes to see how well a writer can handle their dialogue scenes. It's a giveaway as to how well they write. So definitely you can go back in my Writing Wednesdays. I'm posting in on YouTube, so you can see. It's kind of easier to search, so you can see some of the dialogue. But today, dialogue sessions that we've had. But today we are going to talk about point of view. I have a question from Chelsea. So Chelsea, if you are watching today, she sent it to me through my website, so I was able to do this on her question. Hey Janet, I wanted to reach out because I saw a tweet today. Somebody wanted to get folks' favorite novels where the narrator tells the extended story of another character. Someone mentioned all of Dostoevsky. I was wondering if you could maybe offer your favorites or your perspective on these type of novels where the narrator is not necessarily the ones experiencing the action. Okay, well, this is what I call the As Told To novel, or it can be a secondary character who is watching the story unfold and then having their own take of what's going on. I guess in terms of the As Told To, I mean, that's classic. That's like most of Mom, a lot of British fiction in the 19th century, gentlemen sitting in the Explorers Club, and one of them begins a story. And so the person through whose eyes we are seeing the story is not necessarily directly involved. They're the recipient of an As Told To story, who, often that person is telling a story that they heard or something that was delivered to them. So classic Lord Jim. Somebody's telling the story of Jim. I think that I think the British authors of that period were reluctant to get into the real, um, the dirty soup of being one of those characters in sort of a nasty situation. Lord Jim tells the story of a man who had a very high ideals as a young man, and then ended up on a ship, um, and did not live up to his, as a young man, like completely freaked out and did not live up to his ideals in a, pretty major way, and spent the, I don't know about the rest of his life, but spent most of his life trying to atone for what he did. So I think, the As Told To novel allows for a tremendous compression because you can cover a lot of ground. The next time I heard from him, it was in Rangoon in 43. There's a new novel that's coming out by Antoine Wilson called Mouth to Mouth, which is, it's exactly that, older type of novel, but it's a very modern novel about art world shenanigans, in LA. And what it is, it's an As Told To novel, two guys who, um, are stranded in a VIP lounge, overnight. The flights have been canceled, because of, was it 9/11? Some kind of disturbance in the force. And it's coming out soon, but I read it a little while ago. And one is, and they know each other slightly from college. But it is strictly As Told To in the VIP lounge of whatever it is, United Airlines, at LAX, waiting for their flights to be unlocked, opened up again. And it is really fun to see a modern twist on a very old way of telling a story. The two gentlemen in the club, talking about something that's happened long ago, but actually is still happening and changes. The difference is it really changes the recipient character's view of the other character, and what's probably still going on. So there are different kinds of these As Told To novels. Some of them are told to... Is my sound down? Is that better? Okay, I've just turned it up, so sorry. Yeah, that would be a problem if people can't hear me. Is that better? So anyway, the As Told To novel, it gives a narrative distance, so that these, generally it's a narrative distance. Hey, Blair. The narrative distance helps frame the story. It keeps it from becoming too emotionally engaging. In the case of, say, Lord Jim, it's a postmodern story. The Mouth to Mouth, the Antoine Wilson, is more postmodern because we don't trust the storyteller. Then you have another classic that people will always bring up is the Great Gatsby, and the point of view character, Nick Carraway, is not a central character. He's a peripheral character, but he's a young man who wants very much to be part of this world, so highly observant. And he's telling the story of these wealthy people whose lives who he admires, who he wants that world. He wants to be part of that world, and and that he's telling us the story. But as he goes along, his feelings about the people involved begin to change. He begins to see kind of the bigger picture of who they are, and the way he had admired them in the beginning, he ends up with a very different view of these people. So it's kind of a moral education story. And in that case, it's not told in the past of what the gentleman sitting at the club. It's much more an active relationship between the storyteller and the events being told. You have interesting, these kind of novels are, always they're interesting exercise in point of view. So, this is something that in general, where you put the camera, who is the camera, whose story. We always say the story is the protagonist of the action, is the story, is the person who observes is the protagonist. The person who reacts is the protagonist. The change happens to the protagonist. So what happens when you have the story told from a third person's point of view? Well, it's still there. The protagonist is the person who has the change. And it's often the person, not the person in the story, but the narrator, the person who is telling the story or receiving the story. In the case of Mouth to Mouth, the Antoine Wilson, it's the person who hears the story who has the change, who understands things differently, not the storyteller. Whereas in Gatsby, the narrator is the true protagonist, because they are the ones who have the change, who come to understand all of these other people, and to make a change into how he perceives the world and what he wants out of life. And watching their action is the action. So Lewis asks, with a first-person narrator, how can the narrator recall or present a conversation, dialogue, that occurred years ago but have it still be believable she could remember it so well? Isn't that interesting? Usually the reader doesn't question that. How could they remember it so well? If it's a very startling and engaging story, I guess the reader just figures that's so emblazoned. But in fact, what it does is often move us into the story itself. So you have a story like Susan Minot's Evening, a beautiful book about a dying woman who goes and is thinking on her deathbed about this short love affair that she had had a summer back in her youth. And we enter the story, and then we'll come out of it and be in the hospital room and stuff like that, where, we're in real time. But the backstory, the inner story, the memory story is as real as anything. And that's what happens in a lot of these stories, is the frame disappears. The person telling the story at the club in London. It's called Evening by Susan Minot, Minot. But a lot of the stories that are told, to the guys at the club telling the story, there is no change in those people. The change is within the characters of the story, and that frame kind of vanishes as the tale unfolds. We forget about who's being told the story and that framework. So normally we don't wonder that. It would be interesting to have a book or story in which that is an issue. How could you remember this so clearly? How do you know that's what really happened even? You know, then you get like the Antoine Wilson story of, I'm starting not to believe this. And you get the unreliable narrator, which is very interesting, telling you the story. How do people remember the past using the past tense? I did, I went. Isn't that a framework? Isn't that a told to story in a way? Any kind of first person past tense? I was thinking also of the go-between, which is a child, and the children narrators of the unreliable child narrators are really interesting, and those stories work because what's interesting about those stories is the child often doesn't understand what's going on. So they're relating what they see, bits and pieces of what they see, but they're too young to really understand what's going on. So it's fun for the reader because you know more than the narrator does. You read into it. So that's another type of story, where the narrator is not the protagonist. It's an interesting problem. It's like, do you want a frame or not? Anytime you tell a story about your past, a character tells a story about their past in the first person, we are in a frame without even realizing it. Somebody is telling us. Is that a kind of irony, the distance between what the reader knows and what the character knows? I don't think it's ironic. It activates the reader. That there are books in which the reader can just sit passively and the story is told and they can watch it sort of like a movie. And then there are works that make the reader work a little bit. And there's some readers, like a very passive experience where it's all just laid out for them. And then some readers enjoy being a partner with the writer, and the writer gives them clues, and then they have to interpret and they have to figure out. And that's a pleasure that many readers, really enjoy is having to piece together and sometimes being ahead of the character where they see it long before the character sees it. I think that's a super pleasure, because then you're watching the events not only to see what unfolds, but to see if you were right. It brings the reader in like this is my fishing rod. It reels the the reader in, or at least the kind of active reader who wants to participate in the book. Who else does the as told to, or the naive point of view? The unreliable narrators are so wonderful because they do supply that scrim. There are actual events that happen, but they're telling it to you in a certain way because they are trying to manipulate you as a reader. So you get Nabokov, especially Humbert Humbert, but all of Nabokov tends to be tricky that way. You got to watch who's telling you. The naively unreliable who just doesn't understand it. Benji and Sound and the Fury God, being told a story by somebody who's like developmentally disabled, and just the little pieces they get. Yeah, Pale Fire, all of Nabokov. But, you certainly, basically, Faulkner tells in Sound of the Fury, Faulkner's telling pieces of the same story, a family story, over and over again. But who tells the story both changes the voice, changes the amount of unreliability, who's actually telling you the truth, who's self-serving, um, which is a layer of writing that is very interesting, of who is telling the story and how much of the story do they A, understand, B, want to understand. There's a character in Sound of the Fury in the third section, Jason, who's very matter of fact. You can really, finally, you have a character who is not so crazy, depressed, suicidal, whatever, um, simple, that he can actually tell you, but he's a really bitter, angry person who leaves so much out because his soul can't see it. His soul, he has no empathy. He cannot understand why other people behave as they do. So the unreliable narrator is a very interesting point of view related to this question. And that's why people can write novels about the same occurrences, like people who write about the Greek myths, but from very various points of view. You see, things only are true as they are true for a point of view character. So it definitely adds another layer of interest to a novel, to start questioning your point of view character, especially these when it's not told from the point of view of the protagonist, but somebody else. It's like, why are you, is this just idle chatter in the men's, lounge of the Explorers Club or whatever? Mary Renault for Ancient Greece. Yeah, she's wonderful. The King Must Die, one of my very favorites from youth. When the narrator is not the one experiencing the action. Yeah. Sometimes so you think about those two types of characters. Are they minor characters in the story? Or are they in the men's lounge at the, Explorers Club telling you the story in the, grand manner? And then are they changing? Does the story change the narrator as they're narrating? That's when they are part of the story. Then they become the protagonist, even though maybe the action isn't directly about them. Often the people in the observed story work out their fates as the people in The Great Gatsby did, but the only one who learns anything is this narrator, who is not a central figure in the story, but he's the one who eventually has the change. Who's the protagonist of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Well, who has the change? Is it the guy we've been following, or is it the chief who has the change, wakes up? Who's the protagonist of Mary Poppins? Who has the change? Who's the hidden protagonist? The father. It's he, although he is not intimately involved in the actions of all these crazy things that happen to Mary Poppins, doesn't change. The kids really don't change, but the father changes. He's the protagonist. Interesting, huh? Um, so point of view is not always protagonist, but when there's a change, when the effects of the action change that person, that is the protagonist. Not just, that's really an interesting story. Um, I have a couple more questions. If anybody has any more questions about point of view, it's such an interesting topic and has so much to do with character. And how much can they really remember? I'm working with somebody with cognitive problems in the book that I'm working on now. And how much can she remember? And how, I mean, you have to think seriously about memory. Memory is the central issue. So I'm very interested in this. Can you have an omniscient character who isn't a character? Omniscient narrator who isn't a character? Yeah, of course. Omniscient by de facto tells us that there is no, that we're not in the protagonist's point of view, we're in everybody's point of view. And we can also pull back and make statements, godlike statements, from way back. That's Tolstoy is the omniscient. And he is never a character. I mean, he might give pieces himself to different characters. And there might be a Tolstoy stand-in, like Levin, in Anna Karenina, but we're also in Anna Karenina's point of view. We're also in her husband's point of view. We're also in a lot of other people's point of view. I think that, in fact, Levin is the protagonist of Anna Karenina because he has a change. He comes to realize something and changes. Tolstoy doesn't change, but he's the narrator. Blair asks, when you have multiple first-person point of view narrators, can they all change, like in the Poisonwood Bible? Yeah, they can all change, but generally one of them who ends up with the story in the end? Whose change is who has the final word? Usually in a multi-character, multiple protagonist-like characters, what happens is the author will begin to close out this sub-story, and then all of those voices will start disappearing, and one person will take us all the way to the end, and that is the protagonist, like in the Poisonwood Bible. And Max asks, my point is how we shouldn't be head going. How does one do that with an omniscient character, head hopping? There is no such thing as an omniscient character. So the omniscient point of view is the authorial point of view. And you go into everybody's heads. Head hopping is one way of doing omniscient. That's what, Tolstoy's great novels are. You go into everybody's head very fluidly. You go in even for a paragraph and come out again, and then you go into the other one and come out again. And he'll go around a dinner party and know what, 4 people are thinking. So head hopping is sort of a pejorative, in omniscient, that's very common. In close third, where we are the person, then you try to avoid it. You space down and go into the other person's head for a scene, and then maybe go in another person's head for a scene or a chapter. Usually that's how they work. But if you are doing an omniscient, it's a skill, something I would address and show you how Tolstoy does it. How he dips into somebody's head. You can always tell because you experience the senses through that person. We know we're inside that person. They have thoughts about other people. And then you pull out again and look at the big scene that the character wouldn't be thinking about these things. The author is telling us, and then we go and slip into somebody else's mind. Mostly focus on one person per scene. In a close third, we are focus on one, not mostly, we focus on one person per scene. That we don't keep pulling the reader out and throwing him into somebody else's head, throwing him, it's like, who am I supposed to be? In authorial, we center in the authorial voice, and then we dip. But we're aware that we're with the author, and we go in and out. The omniscient is harder. It is for more sophisticated writers. You have to commit to it. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it all the way through the book. You can't suddenly decide, I'm going to do 3 chapters of Jenny in the middle of an omniscient book. If you pick your point, like anything else, you pick a point of view, like any other decision you make in a novel, you build a doorway and then you walk through it. You've made a commitment to the reader of how you're going to tell this book, and then you do it. So in the 19th century, that's all we would do. It would have been considered rude to have closer identification like that, where you are that character. I don't think there are too many. Maybe Hardy. I'm trying to remember. Heidi, hi. So thoughts on writing from a POV outside your race. I am writing a novel set in the 60s, late 50s in Atlanta, the hippie movement. I don't want to ignore the civil rights movement, but don't feel comfortable speaking from that point of view. Well, there were white people involved in the civil rights movement too. But if you don't want to do a close third or first person of somebody from another race or another culture, other ethnicity, religion, etc., you can do several things. You can do an omniscient point of view. You can find someone who you feel more comfortable speaking through their mouths. You can definitely do third person, so you're looking at everybody, everybody's in third person. It gives you a little bit of distance. You can use your own language more. So yeah, if you don't want to ignore the civil rights movement, because that's pretty darn hard to avoid in writing about the 50s and early 60s in Atlanta and not mention the civil rights movement from anybody's point of view. They all lived through that period. You can have people talking, anybody could be talking about it at any time, or, bringing it up. But if you don't feel that you want to write characters of multiple ethnicities in first person, do it in third person. Think about your book that you may want a third person novel. So I think that's how you would deal with that. Let's see. Yeah, the third lets you pull back more. You can observe more. So you can write about Ellen and how she feels about being on that bus with the, angry white people who want you to get up out of your seat. When you say I, you just have to be really careful. I don't see it, if you don't feel like you can do people of other ethnicities, then find a person you can talk about these issues through. I don't find any problem with, writing about people, all kinds of people, but you have to get it right. If it's not your national group, it's not your ethnicity, it's not your whatever religion, make sure that you get it right. Talk to somebody, show it to somebody who is of that group. Just make sure that you're getting it right. Checking is always important when you get out of your own backyard, and one should. I don't say don't do it. I say do it, but just do it right. Well, I've got a couple of other questions here. Let's see if Heidi, is that satisfying you? I hope. Okay, I've got a couple more questions here. This one is, many people say I can't be a good writer if I don't read a lot and have authors I look up to. How should I respond? Many people say I can't be a good writer if I don't read a lot. Yeah, that's very true. It's like, why are you writing if you don't read? If you don't feel that the literary endeavor is something that is exciting and productive and amazing, engaging, why would you be writing? Why don't you play an instrument or, make a film or make a painting or something? Whatever, something you feel is maybe more important than literature. Yeah, I never understand that one. People who write without reading. Do they feel that they read enough already in high school? Well, then why would anybody read their stuff, if they read enough in high school? A writer is a reader, Blair says. Saul Bellow, a quote by Saul Bellow, a writer is a reader moved to emulation. Yeah, that's how we generally start. And we continue that exploration. I think that yes, people, you cannot be a good writer if you don't read a lot, but also it's like, what do you read? I could read a bunch of Harry Potter books or whatever, which are delightful, I guess, but I'm not going to be a good writer if I'm trying to be a third string, writing third string Harry Potter. That's not going to challenge me to write something interesting, important, to engage in the conversation that is literature. So you do have to read, and you have to have a good, good range of things. You read the classics. It's always exciting to read the classics. I used to get audiobooks from the library, and I liked them because you could get fill in the classics that you missed without having to like read David Copperfield or whatever. You just take a walk and they tell you the story. So you have that information. There's like our myths, you need to know where the touchstones of literature have been. And then you read like a writer. It's important. You've heard me talk about this. You read like a writer. You write in the margins. You make notes. You argue. You see where the turns are. Anybody who's took that dialogue class will see, the turns in a scene. Like, what exactly is the writer doing right here? bit by bit by bit by bit. If you read George Saunders' A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, he takes 7 important Russian short stories, and some are short and some are longer. Chekhov is always longer. Um, and he takes them, you read a little bit and you stop and you go, okay, what's happening here? What are they doing here? So this is active reading, is, not just sitting in the back with your popcorn, but, like getting, rolling your sleeves up and getting under the hood and looking at how they put it together. How does it work? Where are the turns? How does it how is this person changing our mood, changing our relationship with the action? How are they doing it? Where are they doing it? Get books that you can mess up. I'm sorry to say, but do so. And so how many people say I can't be a good writer if I don't read a lot. Well, yeah, that's right. And have authors I look up to. Now, why would this person not have authors they look up to? Because they haven't read anything, so they don't even know. So what is it that then it makes me wonder why they chose writing, as as an art form. Like it's an interesting question, and I can't really tell why in the world would somebody who has no authors they look up to, don't read, have no author, but they want to be a good writer. It's unlikely. It's unlikely that they're going to become a good writer. Is reading every day the key to being a good writer? That was another one of the questions I got. The reading every day is a key to being a good writer, but it's like also it's what you read and how you read that really makes a difference. Engaging with the work rather than just reading it and eating your popcorn. We all have certain books we read for entertainment, but at some point you have to say, I really, if I want to produce literature, I want to engage with people who are not only as good as me, but are better than me. It's like they say you don't become a better tennis player by playing with people who are at your level or below your level. Sure, it's fun to beat the pants off them, but you don't get any better. You're only as good as the people that you play with, and slightly less good. So I'm always looking for writers that I usually have several books going at once. I have an unchallenging book I read at bedtime, something just yummy. I have something I read in the morning or in the evening that requires an active. I sit there with a pen, a pencil usually, because I have the ridiculous idea that I can always erase it if I need to. But I never do, because I keep them. If I engage with them on that level, those are books I don't get rid of. And then it's like, how does he do it? Oh, look, there's a turn here. Turn. Oh, he gives us a little clue about what this thing is about. So I'll write DNA in the margin. I'll underline stuff that's really good or give it a good check. So I can go back and find, it's like, oh, that turn of phrase that is so good, or this is so revealing, DNA, or, look at this section of dialogue and look at the turn there. Iron sharpens iron. Oh, that's really good. But it does take time. I do use a timer when I read. I try to read 90 minutes a day, and I use a timer, so I read for a 10-minute, like unbroken 10-minute stretch. Ding. And then I see, okay, that's 6 pages I read in 10 minutes. Then the next 10 minutes. So what that does is it keeps me moving. I don't drift off and start cleaning the kitchen or scrolling on my phone or something. Those bursts keep me going and allow me to keep track of how much time I've put in. To put in, if I want to read 100 books a year, because you should see this house is just piled with unread books. If I wanted to read 100 books a year, I have to read 2 books a week. And if I don't spend 90 minutes a day reading, I'm never going to get the 100 books a year. I'm not going to get through all these books. I'm just going to goof around and goof around and goof around. So I kind of have to be serious with myself. Here's a question. Catherine said, I need to take your dialogue workshop. When's your next one? Well, I just taught one, so I'm probably not going to teach dialogue again for a while. But if you look on YouTube, you'll see a bunch of dialogue Writing Wednesdays. It's easier to find on YouTube. And I'll move the subtext one I did last week. I'll move that over to YouTube too. And let's see. There's another question. So Blair says, do you then gather those good quotes and sections into a notebook? No, I don't. I do annotations in my journal. So I keep a journal and I put everything in there. I draw in there. I write poems in there. I do everything in there. But I have something I do called annotations, which is how what I'm reading is affecting my writing. And if I'm working with a book, reading a book that just is giving me all kinds of ideas and noticing what they do is something exciting for me, I will write it up in my journal, and then I'll have it that way. My notebooks tend to be the sense information, portraits of people, landscapes, anecdotes that I've heard, things stories people have told me. They're just incredible. So that's, voices, gestures, that kind of thing. Superstitions, exercises more than quotes. But I generally keep the book. So yeah, you could have quotes. You could have a whole notebook that's just quotes. And why shouldn't you? That's cool. I have also all kinds of quotation books behind my desk here. Let's see if you can see them. I've got Bartlett's down here. Let's see, can you see that? Yes, Bartlett's. I've got International Thesaurus of Quotations down here. Can you see that? These are all things that I have behind my desk, so these things come to mind. But I'd rather write pithy, epigrammatic things. But they're good for an epigraph for the beginning of your book. Good for titles, too. So that's interesting. But generally, I don't. I keep the book, and then I can look through at the clever things that they've said. So Heidi says, it seems to be a sensitive issue I want to respect. Oh, this is and there are sensitivity readers out there to help. So this is, again, the question of using a point of view character who is not in your of your ethnicity, your religion, your nationality, etc. And there's, I guess they call them sensitivity readers, which I just call friends, of that ethnicity. Yeah, it's always a good thing if you, like, I just remember, and it doesn't even have to be ethnicity or something. It can be, occupation. It can be experiences. I had wrote my second novel was set in the punk rock world of LA in the 80s. And I had a punker friend of mine who was a punk princess. I mean, she was kind of like in the inner circles, to read that book just for catching things that were wrong. Oh my God, my character was wearing the wrong coat for a while. It's like, oh my God, this girl would never wear a coat like that. That's a hippie coat. And it's like, oh my God, thank you. So that's a sensitivity reader too. Always people who've had the experience that you're writing about. You try to find those people. You're, you know, how do you find women who've been foster kids, to check the experience, that I was writing about in White Oleander. I had to get people to make sure I was right. I had a Russian translator who translated Tolstoy, childhood, boyhood, youth into English for Penguin Classics. And he had done all kinds of translation in the period and the kind of people I was using in Marina M. And I had this translator read my book, or at least the first part of it. And he just boned me up on some things I got really wrong. Like, I got wrong the family, Marina's family. My character was a poet, 16 years old, 16, 17, in a upper middle class family, because upper class in St. Petersburg under the czars was a whole different deal and strictly aristocratic. These were intelligentsia. It was an intelligentsia family. The mother was a minor aristocracy, but just, culturally well-regarded people who were part of the conversation but weren't like part of the power structure. And he read this scene where there was conflict between the parents and the daughter, and he said, "No, this is all wrong. That in a family of that kind of sophistication, a 16-year-old girl was a woman, and one didn't tell her what to do." Like an American family, a 16-year-old is still a child. You're a woman, and they would reason with you, but they certainly wouldn't send you to your room or something like that. That's just would not have happened. I learned so much. But if I hadn't sought him out, I would have written a book that wasn't as real as Marina M. turned out to be. So you're always looking for sensitivity readers, or you're always looking for people who know things, and making sure that you get it right, in 360 degrees. You have to get it right. So Heidi says, did you write first, then have them check for accuracy? Yeah, because what else are they going to read? You have to have it on the page. You have to open yourself up to humiliation and somebody going, "Oh, no, you're wrong. You're so wrong." It's like, that's part of the deal. It's like being willing to show people that you might not have gotten it right. Oh my God. But then you can get it right. You have an opportunity. So you do have to write it the way you can, and then show it to people who who will look at it and go, no, you're getting this wrong. You try to make everything as correct as you can as you go, but you can't get hung up on it. You do the best you can. Don't get hung up. but find people before you get too far, you know? Like I got the translator read like the first third of Marina M. when she was still living at home. I didn't need him afterwards because I had internalized what he told me. And I paid for that. I paid for him to read and comment. That wasn't a freebie. So that's, you know, it's worth it. I mean, you do try to make everything as correct as you can. And if you wait too long to get that information, then sometimes you have to tear things up. I had a historical inaccuracy. I lost a day during the Russian Revolution, during the October Revolution, of when the Aurora fired a battleship, when it fired on the Winter Palace. I was off by a day. I was off by like half a day. And my editor's like, you know, who's going to know? It's like, I'm going to know. I'm going to know. And it took me a while. It took me a couple of weeks to straighten that one out. If I hadn't written those scenes already, I would have been in better shape. But it doesn't matter as long as you catch it somewhere. Doesn't matter to the reader, let's just say. Oh, wonderful. Linda said you nailed it, Janet. I was a foster kid. I know. Yeah, I had to talk to people who were foster kids. I got so much information from people who had had the experience. First, I found out that what I had guessed at, what I had imagined was right. That made me feel really good. And then I got details that I could not have made up. How would I have ever been able to make a home like Amelia Ramos where they locked the refrigerator? I wouldn't have thought about that at all. Okay, so it is, so that, I think we've gone over the topics of reading and also of point of view. And we will see you next week. So have happy holidays, read a lot, and enjoy yourself. So thank you for coming. Bye.